What's going on, guys? I'm Brian and welcome back to the channel. So today we're talking about the new ROCCAT Burst Pro. This is an ultralight gaming mouse that I personally am super excited about, but it's actually not because of the mouse itself. Instead, it's because of ROCCAT's new Titan optical switches, and I'm super curious to see how they translate into use on this mouse. Mainly because I actually already saw them in action on the keyboard that I have on my desk right now, the ROCCAT Vulcan TKL Pro. And if you've watched my review of that keyboard, you know I think they're pretty awesome. Now, before we dive into the review, I wanted to let you guys know that ROCCAT did send this mouse over to me for review, but as always, this will not impact my review in any way. All right, so let's talk dimensions first. This mouse weighed in at just about 69 grams on my scale, while also being 120 millimeters long, 39 millimeters tall, and 57 millimeters wide at the grip. The rear is going to also flare out a little bit to about 67 millimeters wide, and that, along with the shape of the mouse, really allows the mouse to fit really well in my palm. Overall, I think most people, regardless of hand size, will find this mouse very comfortable to use in either a palm or claw grip. As for design, this mouse has what's considered a faux ambidextrous design, along with what ROCCAT is actually calling a translucent honeycomb shell. So ultimately, there's going to be two things to clarify from that statement. The first is going to be the faux ambidextrous design. This basically means that the mouse is going to only have side buttons on the left hand side, and so technically, even though you can see that it's actually symmetrical and it can be used by either hand, left-handed users won't be able to utilize the side buttons on this mouse, at least not very, efficiently. The second part of that statement is going to be the translucent honeycomb shell. So honeycomb shells have been a pretty big trend over the last year or so, and obviously this is going to help decrease the weight of the mice that they have the honeycomb shell. But it can certainly introduce some durability issues. You sometimes see like flex issues with those kind of mice. And then you also see dust buildup within the mouse, which is getting onto the components. And obviously that is absolutely no good. So ROCCAT tried to get the best of both worlds by using what they're calling a translucent honeycomb shell, which is basically on the inside of this mouse, it's going to be partially hollowed out to help decrease the weight and help give you that kind of same effect as if you did have a honeycomb shell. Now, the surprising part and an impressive part of this is that the mouse is going to be super solid build quality wise. So you can see me right now, I'm pushing on it. This thing's not flexing at all. It's absolutely solid build quality wise. And to be completely honest, when I was looking over the specs of the mouse, I was absolutely certain that the build quality of this mouse would have had to suffer just a little bit, maybe a little bit of flexing or something, just because of the size of this mouse along with the weight of the mouse as well. But after testing the mouse out and having it in my hand right now, I was absolutely 100% terribly wrong, because again, this thing is super sturdy. The majority of the shell has a very smooth matte finish that is going to be prone to fingerprints. So this is one of the biggest drawbacks I found on this mouse. On the black version that I have for review, stand out like a sore thumb. I am honestly not a big fan of the finish at all, if you can't hear it from my voice already, and I would highly recommend grabbing the white version if you are concerned about having fingerprints on your mouse. The left and right click buttons share the same exact finish that's going to be on the back of the mouse right here, and overall the buttons are pretty solid to use, which is a really good thing, because that's why I was excited for this mouse. Now, let me take a moment to dive deeper into that and elaborate, because this is a big deal for gaming mice, in my opinion. As I've mentioned earlier, I did a review of the Vulcan TKL Pro, and if you've watched it, I think that ROCCAT did a really good job implementing their optical switch technology into the switches on that board. And on the other hand, I guess you could call it, if you've watched my review of the Viper Mini, you know that I think the optical switches on this mouse right here are really close to that nice crisp feel of a good mechanical switch. And so for me, stating that these switches feel really good, for me, what I'm about to say is a pretty big deal. The optical switches on this guy right here, the Burst Pro, feel better than the Viper Minis. They just feel a lot closer to that nice mechanical feel that you want your switches to feel like. I found the left and right click buttons to feel nice and crisp, and my biggest complaint about the left and right click buttons on this mouse was actually the actuation pressure. So like the pressure you needed to actually press down the buttons. It's just a little bit more than a typical mechanical switch. Between the left and right buttons, we're going to have our mouse wheel right here, and then we're going to also have our DPI button. The mouse wheel has a really nice rubberized texture, and it scrolls really well, although it is a little soft pressure-wise for my taste. I wish there was a little bit more resistance here. The mouse wheel click feels great and tactile, and it's up there with my favorite mouse wheels I've tested and I've used. As for the DPI button, well, it's probably the best, believe it or not, DPI button I've ever used. However, I will say it's kind of hard to say because I don't really pay attention too much to, you know, the actual importance of the DPI buttons, the center buttons on mice. I just don't use them very often, so I don't really pay attention to them. But I went back through and I checked out a bunch of the mice I've used and I've reviewed on this channel before, and this was probably the best one out of all the ones I've tested thus far. On the sides, we're gonna find a similar matte finish to that of the actual main shell here, but it's gonna be like tinted a little bit lighter, and it's gonna have a nice textured and slightly rougher hexagon pattern on it. The pattern is gonna let you have a better grip, which is gonna definitely be great for heated moments in game. The side buttons are both fine overall. Like the Viper Mini, they flare out just a smidge that helps you like kind of actuate them a little bit better, makes them easier to use, especially when you're in a heated moment. I use my side buttons all the time. So they're really important to me. And so like if they weren't good, you would definitely know for sure. The clicks feel pretty solid overall, and they feel a little better than like that of the G305s. Looking at the front of the mouse, we have our non-removable, so this is not removable cable, which is typical out of a gaming mice, right? And it's going to be called the Phantom Flex cable. This cable is great, it looks great, and is super lightweight as well. It reminds me a lot of Razer's own Speed Flex cable, except the Phantom Flex cable has this really nasty capacitor. This thing is, look how big this thing is. I'll show you guys B-roll on this, but this thing is absolutely massive towards the USB plug end of it. I don't know, I mean, I guess capacitors help, you know, keep the signal nice and clean, but in my opinion, I would have probably just rather had this not be on here and then have the actual cable to be a little bit shorter, which should have solved that issue as well. Again, I know this is gonna be tucked behind most people's PCs, but I think it just looks bad, and I would have rather had the cable to be a little bit shorter, to be completely honest. As for the bottom of the mouse, there are gonna be two things worth mentioning, and that's gonna be the two 100% PFTE mouse feet that are found at the front as well as the back of the mouse, and these feel great and glide super well. Second is going to be this sensor, which is going to be ROCCAT's own 16K owl eye optical sensor. The sensor is based off of the Pixart PMW3389 sensor, and overall I found it to be absolutely wonderful. I felt the performance of this mouse was pretty stunning and just as good as any other mouse I have used, and the combination of the new Titan optical switches, the owl eye optical sensor, and then the mouse feet make for an absolutely awesome gaming experience in my eyes. Productivity use was fine too, as I felt the shape and size of the mouse prevented me from having any hand fatigue, even while I was using the mouse for hours at a time. And other than that, there's not really much more I can say about the performance of this mouse. And so I'm just gonna move on to talking about the Swarm software, which actually feels pretty good for this mouse. I'm typically not super gung-ho about peripheral software just because it just doesn't feel all that useful for me. I know you can change stuff and this and that, but the Swarm software for the Burst Pro has a lot of cool features for the mouse, for this particular mouse. I mean, again, I've used it for the Elo 7.1 Air when I did the review on that, and I've used it for the TKL Pro, the Vulcan TKL Pro as well. So I've used that on 3 different devices so far, and for this mouse, I think it's the most useful out of all 3 peripherals so far. You can customize the programmable buttons as well as modify your RGB. You can modify your polling rate. You can mess around with lift-off distance, and the options just keep going on and on and on. There's truly a lot of good stuff within the software, and I also like kind of how it's set up as well for this particular mouse. And so I think ROCCAT is on an absolute roll in 2020 to end 2020, to be more specific. I like the Burst Pro, and I think the Titan optical switches are great, and they're great for consumers too, because the optical switches are gonna last longer than normal switches, and that means that you're not gonna have to replace your mouse as often, which is awesome for us. The performance of this mouse is gonna be lights out in gaming, and I feel like the mouse is super comfortable to use for long periods of time as well, which is absolutely critical in my opinion opinion, for a mouse, for any mouse, you know what I mean? Because you need to have a mouse that's super comfortable in your hand, or else your hand's gonna cramp up and you're just not gonna enjoy the experience of using it. Now, the biggest downside for me is that I'm not the biggest fan of the aesthetics of this mouse. I haven't criticized it in this video yet. I'm more of a minimalistic kind of guy, and I personally feel like the translucent honeycomb RGB, it just looks kind of cheap, and just the overall just look of the mouse looks a little bit cheap. Like compared to like the Viper Mini right here, I just feel like this looks like a more premium mouse, even though it's $20 cheaper. It feels like a little bit more premium mouse as well. Of course, it's gonna be up to you to decide if you like the looks of it or not, and if you don't, to decide if a cheaper price tag and top-notch performance can sway you either way. So if you can pick up this mouse anyway because of the great performance. And then again, I do have the black version, and again, I really don't like how it, you know, shows fingerprints and stuff. So maybe if I had the white version, maybe my opinion on the aesthetics would be completely different. I'm not absolutely sure. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up. If you loved it, subscribe for more content just like this. We release a video every single week. On Fridays is the day that we're releasing stuff right now, and that's where we're continuing to release stuff. And if you do have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. And we do also have a free community Discord that you can join and ask your questions there as well if you want. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.